Hey guys, it's Will here, welcome back to the channel. Tonight going to be taking a look at the Psychic Awakening Phoenix Rising and specifically the rules for the Craftworld Eldar in here. Now in this book you get some lore which I need to get round to reading, you get some rules for Dark Eldar or Drukhari and rules for Ynnari, but as those aren't factions I particularly play at the moment, although they do both interest me, I won't be diving in too much into the rules for those. What I wanted to look at first though was the rules for the Asherani, the Craftworld Eldar. And you get three basic things in here, so I'm going to do a three-part series looking at each of them. We've got the new Craftworld traits, so you can design your own Craftworld in the same way that you can do with Space Marine chapters. You've also got the new runes of fortune, new psychic powers that the Eldar can use that replace Smite, which is quite interesting. But what we're going to be looking at tonight is the new Exarch Powers. So if you have any Exarchs in your army, so any aspect warrior unit can take an Exarch. If you have any of those in your army, you can choose to swap out its basic Exarch power for one from a list of 6, and some of these can be really strong, and so just having a quick glance here, I'm going to focus in, so you see here the swooping hawks, they can either keep their basic Exarch power which is called Herald of Victory, or they can swap it for one of these, or for 1 CP they can go for Exemplar of the Hawk Shrine, or one of them can, which allows them to keep Herald of Victory and take one of the new powers. So what I'm looking to do in this video is go through every shrine. I'm not going to look at every power, just going to look at my top picks and use it as an opportunity to showcase my aspect warriors. So we're going to dive straight in with the first aspect, and I'm just going to go through them in the order they are in the book, starting with the Fire Dragons. Now these guys probably didn't get the best selection of Exarch powers. A lot of them seem to be quite melee focused, and these guys shouldn't be in melee, they just die way too quick. I did once actually take out a Tau Commander in combat with my Fire Dragon Exarch back in the last edition, but that was just sheer darn luck. So yeah, wouldn't normally recommend getting these guys in melee, and their base power's not actually that bad. Crack Shot might be worth keeping in a lot of cases, basically gives your Exarch reroll 1s to hit, which is nice if you remember to roll your Exarch separately from the rest of the unit. But if I was going to pick one, I would probably go Swift Step, which allows them to roll 3 dice when they advance, as long as the Exarch's alive, and basically pick any one of them, so give them a little bit more speed, which is handy because these guys have got very short range weapons, but they're assault weapons and they don't suffer the penalty for moving and firing with assault weapons, so they can just get that little bit closer, maybe just get them into melter range, and that can really start to do some more damage there. So yeah, not the most dramatic of the aspects in terms of the buffs they get from this, but you know, a nice little trick they can do. Next up we have the most numerous of the aspect warriors, the Dire Avengers, and they get some pretty good buffs with this. Their default power, Defend, is pretty forgettable. It basically gives the Exarch a 4+ invuln, but to be honest I've never found that's actually kept him alive or really affected the survivability of the unit, partly because it's just really quite forgettable, and you almost sort of roll all your dice and then remember, oh yeah, he had an invuln, but I've already rolled his save and removed the models now. Yeah, they've got some good powers, but which ones I would pick depends a little bit on the size of the unit, which is why I've got a couple of different squads out here. So for this small squad, I would probably go with Bladestorm, which I think is probably the best overall. This one gives you an extra hit for every 6 to hit you roll, so yeah, that's just really handy, especially you know, as these guys are getting 2 shots each. There are ways to get them rerolls. I've got reroll 1s for Biltan, for example, yeah, not a little bad output. 2 extra hits on a 5-man unit is nice, and obviously that scales, bigger units, better luck, things could go even better. But one I think would be fun to run on a really large unit is Avenging Strike. It's a bit risky, you have to have suffered casualties to do that, but as soon as the unit's suffered any casualties, as long as the Exarch's alive, the Exarch being alive is kind of the condition for all of these, the unit gets +1 to hit and +1 to wound, and there's no kind of thing about that being melee only or anything like that. It's just as soon as they've taken a casualty, they get +1 to hit and wound, which is great. That is really good, but it's risky because you have to take in casualties, so you're not going to get this straight off the bat, and if you take too many casualties it's not really going to be worth it. So a bigger squad, possibly even one with a that little shielding thing, or standing next to Asherman to give them the 4+ invuln. Certainly some good strength here. Third on our list is the Dark Reapers. Now these guys absolutely dominated the early part of this edition in terms of the meta, have somewhat fallen by the wayside in recent months, but still a very good unit, if a little overpriced now. And like the Avengers, they've got some pretty good buffs, and again it can depend on what sort of unit you're running. The two I've particularly picked out here are Rapid Shot, which is the Exarch gets an extra shot, which is great if your Exarch is running a Reaper launcher or an Eldar missile launcher. Just, a weapon that's normally firing only 1 or 2 shots is now firing 2 or 3. Particularly when you go for the crack missile equivalent on the Reaper launcher, the 3 damage crack missile. That, you suddenly doubled your number of shots. Your Exarch can put out some real power. And then the Tempest Launcher has a specific ability for that, if you want to run that weapon, which I know a lot of Eldar players do like, is Rain of Death. You can re-roll the dice to determine the number of shots that gets. So it's a weapon that gets 2d6 shots, so that can be really random. You roll a low roll, you can suddenly get a whole lot of extra shots. In both of these cases, it's worth thinking about taking the stratagem to keep your default power as well. Reroll ones to hit is nice. I think particularly on the Tempest Launcher guy, because this guy's going to be averaging 8 or 9 attacks thanks to the reroll, and so he's going to roll a couple of ones. So if you're not planning to put something like Guide or Natural Leader onto these guys to get rerolls anyway, keeping that is a very interesting option. But yeah, certainly a unit that's done well out of this. Then we've got the Howling Banshees. Now these guys are obviously not the new plastic ones. I haven't got those yet because I'm not buying a £140 box set when I only want 6 or 7 models from it. These are the old metal ones, but still looking good. And their default power is really strong, and a lot of times you're just going to want to use that. It's -1 to hit against them in combat. So yeah, that's really nice. But there are some nice powers you could take either instead of or in addition to. Graceful Avoidance stacks well with the default power, gives them a 5+, basically disgustingly resilient in combat, save after the save. That stacks really nicely with their basic -1 to hit, which is called Washout. So yeah, they're going to become really hard to hurt in combat, good for tying units up, although with toughness 3 and a 4+ save, they're not still not the most resilient thing ever. Got a lot of other decent ones. One I would particularly pick is Whirlwind of Blades, which unlike a lot of the other powers that I've picked out, is one that focuses primarily on just the Exarch herself. If she's got an Executioner or a Power Sword, it's giving her +1 attack, which is pretty nice with the Executioner when this is a weapon that's packing +1 strength, -3 AP, D3 damage, decent enough weapon. And if she's got Mirror Swords, which are basically paired power swords, she gets an additional +2 attacks. So yeah, can start putting out some real hurt with her. And this is definitely one of the units that you want to strongly consider keeping the default power for. Although I still just don't think they're going to quite make their way into the meta, even with the extra buff that GW often give to newly released kits. I just don't think they're going to cut the mustard against some of the stronger stuff out there. Much like the Dire Avengers, the Swooping Hawks, the next aspect we're going to look at, have an Exarch power that the default one is just really forgettable. It's +1 leadership to nearby friendly units on the turn they deep strike. But to be honest, Eldar don't suffer too much with bravery anyway, particularly if you're playing a lot of vehicles, flyers or MSU. So yeah, wouldn't sort of worry too much about keeping that. You get some interesting options. Evade on paper looks really good, 5+ invuln save, bearing in mind that Eldar have a power that can buff invuln saves by 1. as a psychic power. But these guys are toughness 3, you're probably not going to have a large unit of them. I don't think it's going to make them that much more survivable. You know, against the sort of shooting you're going to get against these -1 AP or no AP, that's not going to be doing a lot to save them. So I would actually go for Swooping Barrage, which adds 1 to the roll for their Swooping Hawk grenade packs. And that can be pretty handy to give them some extra mortal wound output when they're flying over things. But yeah, not the most exciting of ones, but yeah, that could be fun, you know, actually having them do a bit more damage with their grenade packs to make them worth remembering to use them. Next up, we've got the Striking Scorpions, in my opinion one of the coolest looking Aspect Warrior units, and their default Exarch Powers sustained attack can be quite useful if you put a lot into buffing it, perhaps keeping Karandras around, or casting a power to give them boosts to hit in combat, but on its own it doesn't achieve that much, so well worth swapping it out if you've not got big plans for it. Stalker looks like a nice power to go for, -1 to hit with ranged weapons while the unit's wholly within terrain, particularly if you've got a small unit that's more looking to kind of, you know, be more of a distraction and an annoyance rather than a real damage unit. But if you're looking for more outright damage, Scorpion Sting is probably the one I would go for when I run my full 10-man unit. +1 to the Mandiblaster rolls. It's effectively going to double the mortal wound output that they do at the start of combat, and could make Mandiblasters quite nasty for the Scorpions. The Shining Spears are another unit that you used to see all the time, but have fallen by the wayside a little bit in recent months. But they've got some pretty good ones here. Their default power gives the Exarch, I think it's like reroll to wounds against monsters and vehicles. It's not that impressive, but it has its uses. But there's a couple of nice ones. On paper, Swooping Dive looks interesting, gives them an additional +1 to their charge rolls. And there's a couple of other ways to get boosts to charge in Eldar. There's the new Ghost Walk power from the Runes of Fortune. There's also the Biltan stratagem that gives them +2 to charge. So there's ways to get some really long charges with these guys, but to be honest, unless you're planning to deep strike them, which, having tested it out, I'm not sure is always the best option, I would rather just go for, what's it called, Withdraw. Basically, at the end of a round of combat, they can fall back 6 inches as if it were the movement phase. And I wouldn't do this after the first round, because then they're just going to get shot up or countercharged. I would try to keep it so they can pull out of combat at the end of your opponent's combat phase, which then allows you to charge back in next turn, or go off and fight something else. So potentially a really fun option there that could have some really good uses. So unfortunately I can't show you my Crimson Hunter Exarch on account of him not actually existing at the moment. Looking to get one in the future because I want to have the full set of all the different Exarchs available to the Eldar, all the aspects, because yeah, Aspect Warriors are cool and I play Biltan, but yeah, and Crimson Hunters are just apparently really good as well. He's got a really good default power actually, probably the best power to use the Exemplar stratagem on if you're going to use any of them at all, because it's reroll 1s to hit, which when you're packing Bright Lances and then either, Bright Lances or Star Cannons plus a Pulse Laser, you know, those reroll 1s can be very nice. It's going to, so definitely want to hold on to that one. But there's some nice options to keep as well. 5+ invuln save from Evade. The type of weapons that are going to be focused on this guy could potentially be the sort that an invuln save is really going to help you against. But there's also another one that I really liked, Hawkeye. Does not suffer penalties for moving and firing heavy weapons. To be honest, it's a shame you can't take both because they're both great. But yeah, Crimson Hunter Exarch could become even stronger with these new abilities, and very much looking forward to getting one. Okay, last aspect now, the Warp Spiders, and these guys have another pretty mediocre default power. It's reroll morale checks, but to be honest, as they often run in small units and they've got pretty high bravery, particularly in Biltan. They're not really something that you're going to really worry too much about running away. So you definitely want to switch this one out. I was actually surprised by how many of their powers seemed to benefit assault. I was like, really? Do you actually want these guys in assault? No, you don't. But the one I did like is ironically called Surprise Assault, but isn't like a power to actually use in the assault. It's re-roll all hit rolls on the turn they arrive from reserve. So yeah, that's pretty nice actually. They've got 2 shots apiece at strength 6. You know, getting those re-rolls, and it's, you know, all re-roll all hits, so it's not just misses, so it gets round the various ways to subtract from your hit rolls. So yeah, definitely one that could make these guys a bit more of a regular appearance on the battlefield. So there you go, that's my top picks for all of the new Exarch powers for what to go for each aspect. If you think something different, if there's something I've missed, then by all means leave me a comment and let me know what you think. On the whole, I don't think any of these powers, like just about everything I've read in Psychic Awakening, Phoenix Rising so far, they're good, but there's nothing amazing. There's nothing that's going to utterly break the game. There's some things that are going to be nice tools to use in your army, maybe even cause a few units to start to become more popular choices in the meta, but I don't think there's anything meta-breaking in here, anything that's an utter game changer. You know, this hasn't brought the same level of change to the thing, to the system, as we've seen with the new Space Marine books that have been coming out. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments, and stay tuned, because hopefully soon I'm going to have a couple more videos looking at the new Psychic powers and also the new Craft World traits.